My wife and daughter left me during cancer for her lover. They returned to claim my wealth. Imagine this, one day, everything is normal. Your family's by your side. You're planning a bright future, and then it all comes crashing down. My wife, my daughter, gone. My world turned upside down overnight. Why? For something I never saw coming. Stay tuned, because the twists in this story will leave you speechless. As I sit here reflecting on how it all began, I can still recall every little detail of my life before it turned upside down. I was a man in my prime, 45 years old, healthy as a horse, and proud of the life I'd built. Every morning, I'd get up at 5, head to the gym, and push myself to the limit. I avoided fast food, alcohol was a rare indulgence, and I hadn't smoked a single cigarette in my entire life. I was the guy who always got a clean bill of health at my annual checkups, the one who coworkers secretly envied, because I looked like I'd found the fountain of youth. My friends joked that I'd probably outlive them all, but none of us could have imagined how quickly that would change. I wasn't just strong and healthy, I was steady. My life was solid, predictable, sure, but also deeply satisfying. My wife, Alara, was the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. She had this effortless grace, the kind of beauty that made people think I'd won the lottery. The day we got married, and my daughter, Leora, was my pride and joy. She was this bright, curious teenager who had me wrapped around her little finger from the day she was born. I loved them both more than words could ever express, and I worked hard every day to provide the best life possible for them. Everything felt so secure. I had a stable career that paid well, a comfortable home in a nice suburban neighborhood, and weekends filled with family BBQs, movie nights, and quiet moments just enjoying each other's company. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, and I cherished it. My biggest worries back then were things like getting a minor dent fixed on the SUV, or figuring out which college Leora might attend in a few years. Life was good, really good. Then came that routine doctor's appointment. I'll never forget the feeling in that sterile, bright office, sitting on the crinkly paper covering the exam table, waiting for my physician to come in. I wasn't nervous, I'd been to the doctor plenty of times before, always walked out with a clean slate. But this time was different. I noticed it the moment he walked in. His usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by something else, somber, serious. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked me in the eye in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Roland," he began, his voice steady, measured. "I have some tough news to share." And then he said the words that stopped my world cold. "It's advanced liver cancer." I couldn't believe it. I had done everything right, eating clean, exercising, never touching cigarettes or hard liquor. No one in my family had ever been diagnosed with cancer before. It didn't make any sense. I sat there, stunned, as he explained the options: chemotherapy, a possible clinical trial, but no guarantees. The survival rate was low, too low. My mind was spinning. How could this happen to me? I wasn't supposed to be sick. I was supposed to be the one who made it to 80, maybe 90, still running half marathons and tossing the football around with my grandkids. Yet here I was, faced with an enemy I couldn't see, couldn't punch, couldn't outwork. I remember walking out of that office in a haze, barely noticing the receptionist's sympathetic smile. The world outside looked the same: blue sky, the hum of traffic, the faint scent of fresh-cut grass, but everything felt different. I drove home on autopilot, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The thought of telling Alara and Leora felt unbearable. How would they react? Would they be scared, angry, or would they do what I needed them to do most: be strong for me, stand by me? I kept replaying the doctor's words in my mind, trying to make sense of them, trying to wrap my head around a future I never thought I'd have to face. When I got home that evening, I sat in the car for what felt like hours, just staring at our house, the place that had always been my refuge. It was a modest 2-story with a well-kept lawn, a basketball hoop in the driveway, and a porch swing where I used to sit and sip coffee on lazy Saturday mornings. Inside, I knew my wife and daughter were waiting, probably going about their usual routines. Alara might be tidying up the kitchen, humming to herself like she always did, and Leora would likely be sprawled on the couch, texting her friends, or watching some sitcom. They had no idea that in the span of a single doctor's visit, everything had changed. I finally forced myself out of the car and walked through the front door. The smell of dinner hit me, something Italian. Maybe lasagna, and for a split second, I felt normal again. But that moment was fleeting. I knew I couldn't put this off. I had to tell them. I called them into the living room, my hands trembling, my throat dry. They sat down, Alara on the couch and Leora on the floor by the coffee table, her phone still in her hand. I couldn't find the right words, so I just said it. I have cancer, I blurted out, my voice cracking. It's advanced. There was a long, unbearable silence. Alara's expression was unreadable, her hands folded in her lap. Leora looked up from her phone, her face a mixture of confusion and worry. Finally, Alara spoke, her voice calm, almost detached. "What's the plan?" she asked. "What did the doctors say we should do?" Her reaction wasn't the shock or grief I expected. It was practical, almost businesslike. Maybe that was her way of processing it, but it caught me off guard. Leora didn't say much, she just sat there, her big brown eyes fixed on me, as if searching for answers I didn't have. I tried to reassure them, though my own confidence was shaky at best. I told them I would fight this, that we would get through it together. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground beneath me was beginning to crumble. I needed them now more than ever, and I hoped I prayed that they would be there for me, that they would be my rock, as I stepped into the most terrifying battle of my life. I had always thought my family would rally around me in my darkest hour. Maybe it was naive, but I imagined Alara taking my hand and telling me that no matter how rough it got, she'd be there, that we'd face it together. I thought Leora would look at me with those big, worried eyes and promise that she'd help in any way she could. Instead, from the moment I told them the truth about my cancer, things started shifting. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A short response here, a distracted glance there. But soon, the distance between us became as clear as day. It was like my illness had created a fault line, and the ground was splitting beneath our feet. Alara tried to keep things normal at first, making dinner, cleaning up after the dog, carrying on conversations that avoided the elephant in the room. But there was something missing. The tenderness that had once defined our marriage was gone. Her hugs felt obligatory, her words rehearsed. She stopped looking me in the eye when I spoke about my treatments, or how the chemo left me exhausted. "You'll get through it," she'd say, her tone flat, her focus already drifting elsewhere. It was as if my cancer had transformed me into a stranger in her life, a burden she didn't want to carry. Leora was no better. I didn't expect her to fully understand what I was going through, she was just a teenager, after all. But the lack of empathy hit me harder than I expected. She spent more time with her friends, her headphones practically glued to her ears. When she was home, she'd sit on the couch scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. If I asked her for help with something simple, like bringing me a glass of water, I'd get an exaggerated sigh, or a muttered fine before she went back to whatever video she was watching. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, telling myself that teenagers were naturally self-absorbed, that this wasn't about me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was going on. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard Alara's voice downstairs. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out the words, but her laughter carried up the stairs like a dagger. She sounded carefree, happy, so different from the woman who barely smiled in my presence anymore. I convinced myself that she was talking to a friend, venting about the stress of having a sick husband. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But the next day, when I came home early from a doctor's appointment, I found her in the kitchen, typing furiously on her phone, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. She didn't notice me right away, and when she did, she quickly put the phone down and offered a forced smile. "How was the appointment?" she asked, her voice too cheerful. "It went fine," I replied, studying her carefully. She avoided my gaze, busying herself with the dishes. Something wasn't right. I started noticing little things after that. The way she'd leave the room to take certain calls, the way she'd hide her phone screen when I walked by. One evening, I asked her point blank who she'd been talking to so much lately. "Just a friend from work," she said, too quickly, too defensively. Her body language told a different story, her arms crossed, her eyes darting to the side. My gut churned, but I didn't push further. Not yet. I wasn't ready to confront the possibility that the woman I had loved for so many years might be slipping away from me. Leora's behavior also started to change in ways that were hard to ignore. She became more distant, more irritable. If I asked her to spend time with me, she'd roll her eyes or give me some excuse about homework or needing to meet up with friends. Once, when I asked her to sit with me while I rested on the couch, she muttered, "Why can't Mom do it?" and walked out of the room before I could respond. I wanted to believe it was just her way of coping, that she was scared and didn't know how to deal with it. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. It wasn't just fear, it was frustration, maybe even resentment. And it hurt more than I could put into words. I tried talking to Alara about it one evening. We sat at the kitchen table, the air heavy with unspoken tension. "I feel like we're all drifting apart," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I know this is hard on all of us, but I need to feel like we're in this together." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I'm doing the best I can, Roland," she said after a long pause. "You have no idea how stressful this is for me." Her words were sharp, almost accusatory, and I felt my chest tighten. "I'm not saying it's easy," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I need you. I need both of you." Alara shook her head, pushing back her chair. "You don't think I know that? You think I don't feel the pressure? Maybe I'm not the one with cancer, but I'm the one holding everything together while you're falling apart." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I thought I saw a glimpse of the woman I used to know, the one who cared. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She turned away, leaving me sitting there alone, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a stone. As the weeks went by, the cracks in our family grew wider. Alara became more withdrawn, spending hours on her phone, or disappearing into the bedroom early. Leora barely spoke to me, her presence in the house reduced to a series of closed doors and muffled music. I tried to reach out to both of them, to bring us back together, but it felt like trying to hold on to water slipping through my fingers. Every time I thought I was making progress, something would happen to remind me that they were already drifting away. I'll never forget the day I came home from chemo and found Alara's phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked. It was an accident. I wasn't trying to snoop, but a message caught my eye. It was from someone named Jeff, and the words were seared into my brain. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again." My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. There were other messages, flirty, intimate. The kind of messages you send to someone you're falling for. I felt sick, not just from the chemo, but from the realization that my suspicions had been right all along. She wasn't just drifting away, she was leaving me. And the worst part? She hadn't even had the decency to tell me. I put the phone down and went to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror, my pale, gaunt reflection staring back at me. I didn't recognize the man I saw. I was tired, beaten down, and now, betrayed. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. I was too weak, too broken. Instead, I went to bed, lying awake for hours, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? Was it because of my cancer? Did she think I was going to die, and she needed someone else to fill the void? The questions burned inside me, but there were no answers, only the cold, crushing weight of betrayal. Leora wasn't any easier to reach. She started coming home later, spending more time out with friends. When she was home, she was glued to her phone, her interactions with me reduced to monosyllabic responses or annoyed sighs. One evening, I asked her if she wanted to watch a movie, something we used to do all the time. She barely looked up. "Maybe later," she said, her voice devoid of enthusiasm. Later never came. I sat there alone, the TV flickering in the dark, wondering if she even cared anymore. I started to feel like a ghost in my own home. The love, the connection, the warmth, all of it had vanished. I tried to hold on, to keep reaching out, but each attempt was met with coldness or indifference. It felt like I was fighting a war on two fronts. The cancer that was eating away at my body, and the growing distance between me and the people I loved most. I didn't know which battle was harder to endure. All I knew was that the family I thought would stand by me no matter what was slipping further away with each passing day. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. Secrets were revealed that changed everything. And now, I have to ask, what would you do if you found yourself in my position? Comment 1 if you'd fight for your family. 2 if you'd let them go. Tell me your thoughts right now. I'll never forget the moment I found out for sure. For weeks, I'd been telling myself it was all in my head. That I was overthinking things. That Alara was just under a lot of stress. I tried to push away the nagging voice in the back of my mind. The one whispering that something was seriously wrong. But that voice had grown louder, more insistent. The late-night phone calls she took in the other room. The way she'd put her phone down the moment I walked in, acting like nothing happened. The sudden absences, the excuses that didn't add up. I wanted so badly to believe that it was just the strain of dealing with my illness. That she was retreating because she was scared or overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to face it. One night, after another grueling chemo session, I came home to an empty house. I'd gotten used to it by then. Alara often wasn't there when I returned, and Leora was usually out with friends or holed up in her room. I stumbled into the kitchen, feeling the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that only chemo could bring, and saw Alara's phone sitting on the counter. It was unlocked, screen glowing, a text message open and waiting. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the fatigue clouding my judgment, or maybe I just couldn't stand the not knowing anymore. Whatever it was, I reached for the phone, my heart pounding, my hands trembling as I picked it up. At first, the words didn't register. I saw the name Jeff at the top of the screen, a name I didn't recognize. And then I saw the message. I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. My breath caught. I stood there, frozen, staring at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something less damning. But they didn't. I scrolled up, barely able to process what I was seeing. The messages were casual at first, but they quickly turned personal, intimate. I couldn't believe what I was reading. There were inside jokes I didn't understand, mentions of meetups I hadn't known about, and a tone of familiarity that made my stomach churn. This wasn't just some work friend or someone she'd met at a book club. This was something much deeper, something she had been hiding from me for who knows how long. My head spun as I put the phone down. My chest felt tight, my hands clammy. It wasn't just the betrayal that hit me, it was the timing. I was at my lowest, my most vulnerable, and she had chosen this moment to let someone else into her life. I couldn't understand it. How could the woman I had spent years building a life with do this to me now? I'd loved her through everything, our arguments, our struggles, all the ups and downs that came with years of marriage. And now, when I needed her the most, she was sharing her heart, her time, her life with someone else. I stumbled out of the kitchen, barely able to catch my breath. I didn't know what to do. Confront her? Scream? Cry? Every emotion hit me at once, a tidal wave of anger, sadness, disbelief. My mind was racing, but my body felt paralyzed. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, my hands clutching the armrests as though they might anchor me to reality. I tried to convince myself that there had to be an explanation, something I was missing. But no matter how I spun it, the evidence was right there in front of me. She had betrayed me. And the worst part was that she didn't even seem to care enough to hide it anymore. Hours passed. I sat in that dark living room, replaying every moment of our recent interactions, trying to piece together when it had started. Was it before the diagnosis? After? Had she been looking for a way out all along, and my illness was just the perfect excuse? I thought about the late nights she spent working, the times she seemed unusually happy after running errands, the way she'd smile at her phone in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in years. It all added up now, like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. When Alara finally came home, it was late. She walked in with a grocery bag, her heels clicking on the tile floor. "Hey," she said casually, placing the bag on the counter. She didn't even glance my way. It was as if she didn't notice the heaviness in the room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I sat there, silent, watching her move around the kitchen. My mind screamed at me to say something, to confront her right then and there. But I couldn't, not yet. I wasn't ready. I was still reeling from what I'd found, still trying to figure out how to process the reality of what she'd done. So I just sat there, staring at her as she unpacked the groceries, her movements methodical, her face a mask of normalcy. It hit me then, the full weight of what I was up against. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about the person I thought I knew. The person I thought I could count on. Revealing herself as someone completely different. The woman who had once held my hand and promised to love me through sickness and health was now texting another man that she missed him. She wasn't just pulling away, she was already gone. Living a life I hadn't been invited into. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, the silence between us was deafening. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't speak. My mind raced with questions I didn't know how to ask. Why him? Why now? Had she ever really loved me? And if she hadn't, had I just been fooling myself all these years? I stared at the ceiling. The faint sound of her breathing next to me only making the ache in my chest worse. I wanted to grab her hand, to pull her close and beg her to tell me it wasn't true. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to touch her, to speak to her, to acknowledge the woman lying next to me as the same person I had built my life with. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there in the dark, every part of me screaming for answers. For some way to understand how we had ended up here. But there was no answer. Just the cold, hard truth staring me in the face. She had made her choice. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly alone. As I stood there in the kitchen, her phone still lying on the counter, I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I'd spent the night before wrestling with what I'd seen, replaying every moment of the last few months over and over in my mind. The unanswered questions, the late nights, the dismissive tone she used whenever I tried to talk about the future, everything was starting to make sense. Even though I desperately wanted it not to. This morning, as I watched her walk into the kitchen, the faint smell of her perfume hanging in the air, I made a decision. I had to confront her. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, wondering if the woman I'd built my life with was already halfway out the door. I needed to know, once and for all, if what I feared was true. "Alara," I said, my voice low but steady. She didn't look up right away, busying herself with the coffee maker, her back turned to me. "We need to talk." The words hung in the air for a moment, and I saw her shoulders tense slightly. Still, she didn't turn around. Instead, she reached for a mug, filling it slowly, as if stalling for time. "About what?" she asked finally, her voice too casual, too controlled. "About us," I said, stepping closer, my pulse quickening. "About what's been going on, about who you've been talking to." Her hand froze mid-motion, the sound of the coffee pouring suddenly stopping. She turned to face me, and I saw it in her eyes, a flicker of something, guilt maybe, or fear. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice sharp now, defensive. "You've been acting strange, distant," I continued, trying to keep my tone even, though my chest was tight. "I'm not stupid, Alara. I know something's going on." For a moment, she just stared at me, her jaw set, her eyes hard. Then she scoffed, shaking her head. "You're imagining things, Roland. I've been here. I've been doing everything for you. How can you even think?" "I saw the messages," I cut in, my voice firm. Her face went pale, and for the first time, she looked genuinely caught off guard. "I know about Jeff. I know about all of it." I expected her to deny it, to get angry, to tell me I was out of line. But instead, she just stood there, silent. That silence felt louder than anything she could have said. It confirmed everything. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Why would you do this to me now? Of all times, now?" She took a step back, crossing her arms over her chest, her eyes darting away from mine. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You don't know what it's been like." I let out a bitter laugh, unable to contain it. "What it's been like for you? I'm the one fighting cancer, Alara. I'm the one going to chemo, feeling like my body's falling apart. And you what? You decide this is the time to find someone else? To start sneaking around? It's not like that," she snapped, her voice rising. "I didn't plan this. I didn't go looking for." She stopped herself, her hands clenching at her sides. "I'm not proud of it, okay? But you don't know how hard it's been. Feeling like I'm the only one holding everything together. You're so focused on your treatments, your survival, and I get it. I do. But I felt invisible. Roland. Like I'm not even here anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Invisible? Was she serious? I thought about all the times I'd reached out to her, all the times I'd told her I needed her, that we needed to face this together. I wasn't trying to ignore her. I was trying to stay alive. You felt invisible? I said, my voice low and trembling. I've been clinging to whatever strength I have left, trying to keep this family from falling apart. And you decided that made you invisible? She looked down at the floor, biting her lip, and for a moment I thought she might apologize, might try to make it right. But then she said, I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I stepped back, shaking my head. That's not an answer, I said, my hands balling into fists at my sides. That's not an excuse. You don't just trip and fall into an affair, Alara. This isn't some accident, this is a choice. And you made it. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't stop them. The betrayal, the anger, the hurt, it all poured out of me. You made it while I'm here, fighting for my life. You made it when I needed you most. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, stopping her. No. Don't. I can't listen to this anymore. I turned away, my chest heaving, my mind racing. I didn't know what I expected her to say, but whatever it wasn't this. There was no apology, no remorse, just excuses. Just a hollow justification for something I couldn't forgive. I walked out of the kitchen, needing to put distance between us, needing to breathe. My hands were shaking, and my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I had to get out of that house, away from her, away from the suffocating weight of what she'd done. I grabbed my jacket, my car keys, and headed out the door. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I welcomed it. I got in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My chest felt tight, my stomach churned, and my mind wouldn't stop replaying our conversation. I thought about the woman I married, the woman who used to laugh with me, who used to hold my hand when life got tough. I thought about all the plans we'd made, all the promises we'd kept until now. My throat burned, my eyes stung, and I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the sound echoing in the empty car. How had we ended up here? How had everything fallen apart so completely? I didn't have an answer, and I wasn't sure I ever would. All I knew was that the woman I thought would be by my side, through anything, was already gone. And I was left to face the battle of my life alone. After my confrontation with Alara, I was left reeling. The betrayal, the excuses, none of it made sense, and none of it felt real. The house we had built together, the life we had shared, suddenly felt like a hollow shell. I tried to focus on the day-to-day things, the tasks that had once given me a sense of stability. I thought if I kept busy, I could push everything else out of my mind. But that was easier said than done. The silence between us had grown so thick, I felt like I was drowning in it. I'd come downstairs and see her at the kitchen table, phone in hand, her eyes scanning the screen. She'd glance up, give me a tight-lipped smile, and go back to whatever she was doing. No matter how hard I tried to act normal, to pretend we could still function as a family, I knew the truth was out. There was no going back. But what hurt more than anything was the way Leora started pulling away. My daughter, my little girl who used to run into my arms the moment I walked through the door, now barely acknowledged me. I knew teenagers could be distant. I told myself it was just a phase, that she was dealing with her own emotions in her own way. But the little things like the way she'd avoid making eye contact or the sighs she'd let out whenever I asked her to do something, started to pile up. I'd ask if she wanted to watch a movie, and she'd mumble something about needing to study or having plans with her friends. I'd try to talk to her at dinner, only to be met with one-word answers or distracted nods. It wasn't just the normal teenage angst. It was like she didn't want to be around me anymore. The worst part was how much it reminded me of Alara. The same detachment, the same sense of being somewhere else even when she was right in front of me. Leora had always been close to her mom. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't help wondering if Alara's behavior, her emotional distance, was rubbing off on our daughter. There were times I'd hear them laughing in another room, their voices soft and conspiratorial. When I'd walk in, the laughter would stop, and they'd exchange glances that made my stomach turn. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were talking about me, that they were shutting me out of their world. It made me question everything. Was I the problem? Was I doing something wrong? Or was it something bigger, something I couldn't fix? One evening, I asked Leora if she wanted to help me with dinner. It used to be something we enjoyed cooking together, joking around, and stealing bites of food before it was done. I can't right now, she said, not even looking up from her phone. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to say. It'll only take a few minutes. I tried again, my voice as gentle as I could make it. She let out a sigh, put her phone down, and walked into the kitchen. Fine, she said, her tone flat, her movement sluggish. As we worked, I tried to talk to her, to get her to open up. How's school? I asked. Fine, she said. Anything interesting happened today? She shrugged. Not really. The conversation was going nowhere, and the tension in the room was suffocating. Finally, I put down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables and turned to her. Leora, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Is something wrong? You've been so distant lately. I feel like I don't know what's going on with you anymore. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought she might say something. That she might open up and tell me what was on her mind. But instead, she shook her head. I'm fine, she said, her voice clipped. I'm just busy. Busy with what? I pressed, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. She sighed again, louder this time. Schooled off friends. Stuff. Why do you always have to ask so many questions? The words hit me like a slap. I wasn't trying to pry. I just wanted to understand. I wanted to feel close to her again, to know that despite everything, we still had a connection. But it was clear she didn't see it that way. I let it go, not wanting to push her further. But as she walked away, I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the one that had been growing since my diagnosis. It wasn't just the cancer eating away at me, it was this distance, this growing gap between me and the people I loved most. I knew things weren't perfect before, but I had always believed we could get through anything together. Now, it felt like I was the only one trying, the only one holding on. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the half-prepared meal in front of me, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my entire life. After that evening with Leora, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her too. Every interaction felt like a battle I was destined to lose. The harder I tried to reach out, the more distant she became. It wasn't just the usual teenage moodiness anymore. There was something deeper, something I couldn't put my finger on. I started watching her more closely, not in a creepy way, but just trying to understand what was going on. I noticed how quickly she put her phone away whenever I walked into a room. How she avoided sitting at the dinner table for too long. How she spent hours in her room with the door closed. I told myself it was normal, that teenagers needed space, but my gut told me otherwise. It told me I was watching my daughter slip away right in front of me. Then one night, I came home from a particularly brutal chemo session. The nausea was overwhelming, the kind that left me unable to eat or even sit comfortably. I just wanted to collapse on the couch, and maybe have someone bring me a glass of water. Just a small act of kindness to remind me I wasn't completely alone. But when I walked through the door, the house was silent. No Leora, no Alara. I called out, but no one answered. I checked my phone, hoping maybe there was a message I missed. Nothing. I sank onto the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, the silence pressing down on me. It wasn't just about that one moment. It was the pattern. Every time I needed them, they weren't there. A little later, I heard the front door open. Leora walked in, earbuds in, her face illuminated by her phone. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice even. She barely glanced up. Hey, she muttered, heading straight to her room. Leora, wait a second, I called after her. She stopped, sighed, and turned back to me. What? She asked, her tone flat. Where have you been? I asked, my voice calm, though my chest was tightening. Out, she replied, shrugging. With who? Friends, she said, her eyes darting away. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal? I repeated, feeling a surge of frustration. Leora, I just got back from chemo. I come home and the house is empty. I don't even know where you are most of the time anymore. It is a big deal. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. You always make everything about you, she said, her voice laced with annoyance. I'm sorry you're going through this, but I have a life too, okay? Those words hit me harder than any diagnosis. I stared at her, my mouth open, unable to form a response. She turned and walked to her room, shutting the door behind her. I sat there, stunned, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. I wanted to call her back, to tell her how much her words hurt, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She was pulling away, and I didn't know how to stop it. I thought about talking to Alara, but she wasn't home yet, and even if she were, I wasn't sure she'd listen. The gap between us had only grown since our confrontation. We barely spoke beyond the necessities. There were no heartfelt talks, no reassurances, no shared plans for the future. She stayed busy working, running errands, meeting up with friends, and I stayed home, trying to hold myself together. The few times I did try to bring up Leora's behavior, Alara just shrugged it off. "She's a teenager," she said. "She'll grow out of it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just teenage rebellion. This was something else. Something worse. I started noticing how often Leora and Alara would leave the house together. "We're going shopping," Alara would say, or "Leora wants to get a new dress." I'd offer to come along, but they'd always have some reason why I shouldn't. "You should rest," Alara would say, giving me a sympathetic look that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll only be gone a couple hours." I wanted to believe it was innocent, that they were just spending mother-daughter time together. But then there were the hushed conversations, the quick glances when I entered the room, the way they'd both go quiet if I asked where they'd been. It wasn't just me being paranoid. I knew they were keeping something from me. I just didn't know what. One day, I decided to push a little harder. Alara had just come home with Leora, both of them carrying shopping bags. I was sitting on the couch, feeling too weak to do much else, but I mustered the strength to ask. "What did you two buy?" I asked, forcing a smile. Alara looked at Leora, who quickly darted upstairs. "Just some clothes," Alara said, her voice clipped. "Can I see?" I asked. "I mean, you've been gone for hours. I'm curious what you picked out." She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "It's just a dress for a school thing," she said. "Nothing exciting." "What school thing?" I pressed. "It's a dance or something. I don't know the details. Leora can tell you later." "Why didn't she tell me about it?" I asked, my smile fading. Alara frowned. "I don't know, Roland. Maybe she didn't think it was a big deal." "Why are you grilling me about it?" Her tone caught me off guard. It wasn't just defensive, it was irritated, almost hostile. "I'm not grilling you," I said slowly. "I'm just trying to understand why my daughter doesn't tell me these things. Why I feel like I'm being left out of my own family." She crossed her arms and looked away. "You're not being left out. You're just going through a lot right now. Leora's just trying to keep things normal. That's all." But it didn't feel normal. It felt calculated. And no matter how much I wanted to believe her, something deep inside told me I couldn't. That night, as I lay in bed, I tried to make sense of everything. The gaps in their stories, the way they both seemed to shut me out, it all pointed to something more. But I didn't have the energy to confront it yet. The chemo was wearing me down, and every day felt like a battle just to keep going. I told myself I'd wait, gather more information, try to approach the situation carefully. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that the distance between us wasn't just emotional. There was something they weren't telling me, something they were hiding. And as much as it terrified me to admit, I had to face the fact that the two people I loved most in the world were slowly slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. It was late past midnight when I finally reached my breaking point. I had spent hours sitting in the dark, just listening. Alara and Leora were upstairs, talking quietly behind closed doors, and I could hear their voices drifting down the hall. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it didn't matter. The walls between us had become impenetrable. Every word, every laugh, every pause in their conversation was a reminder of how far I'd been pushed out. And I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I got up from the couch, my legs shaky and my chest tight. Each step toward the stairs felt heavier than the last. I paused at the bottom, gripping the banister, my breath shallow and uneven. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I climbed the stairs slowly, the creak of each step breaking the silence that had been suffocating me for weeks. When I reached the top, I stopped in front of Leora's room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of light from inside. I could hear Alara's voice, calm and measured, and Leora's softer responses. They sounded close, intimate, like they were sharing a secret. I pushed the door open. They both looked up, startled. Leora was sitting cross-legged on her bed, her phone in her lap. Alara was perched on the edge, her hands resting on her knees. For a moment, none of us spoke. The air felt electric, charged with unspoken words. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why are you two always shutting me out?" Alara stood up, her expression guarded. "Roland, what are you doing? It's late." "I don't care what time it is," I said, stepping inside. "I'm tired of this. The whispers, the secrets. I'm your husband, Alara. I'm your father, Leora. I deserve to know what's happening." Leora looked down at her phone, avoiding my gaze. Alara crossed her arms, her posture stiff. "Roland, you're imagining things. Nothing's going on. We were just talking." "About what?" I asked. "What's so important that you can't include me? Why does it always feel like you're planning something behind my back?" Alara's eyes flickered, a flash of something I couldn't quite place: nervousness, maybe, or guilt. "You're reading into it too much," she said, her voice calm but not convincing. "We're just trying to keep things normal. That's all." I turned to Leora, hoping she'd tell me the truth. "Leora, what's really going on? You've been so distant lately. I feel like I don't even know you anymore." She shifted uncomfortably, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her blanket. "It's not what you think, Dad," she said, barely above a whisper. "Then tell me what it is," I said, my frustration spilling out. "Help me understand. I'm standing here, begging you to let me in, and all I get are excuses. Because you're always looking for something to be wrong," Alara snapped suddenly. "You're always questioning, always doubting, and it's exhausting, Roland. I'm exhausted." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I took a step back, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "You're exhausted?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "I'm the one fighting for my life. I'm the one who wakes up every day wondering if it'll be my last. And you're exhausted?" "I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, but the damage was done. I turned to Leora again. "Leora, please," I said, my voice breaking. "I just need you to talk to me. Tell me what's going on." She looked up at me then, her eyes glistening with tears. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said. "I'm trying to deal with everything. It's hard for me too, you know." The room fell silent again, the weight of our words hanging in the air. I looked between them, searching for something, anything that would make sense of what was happening. But all I saw were two people I barely recognized. Two people who were supposed to be my family, my support, and who now felt like strangers. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I can't keep feeling like I'm the enemy in my own home." I turned and walked out of the room, the walls closing in on me as I made my way back downstairs. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing in the cool night air. The stars were scattered across the sky, indifferent to my pain, and the silence out here was different, calmer, more peaceful. I leaned against the porch railing, letting the chill seep into my skin. My mind was a storm, thoughts and emotions swirling so fast I couldn't grab hold of any of them. I wanted to scream, to cry, to smash something. But instead, I just stood there, staring out into the darkness. I didn't know how we'd gotten here, and I didn't know how to fix it. I only knew one thing for certain. The people I loved most in the world had shut me out, and I was left standing on the outside, looking in. I'd always prided myself on being the steady one in our family. No matter what life threw at us, I was the anchor. And yet, standing there on the porch that night, I felt unmoored. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was the one being shut out. Not by chance or circumstance, but by the people I'd trusted most. Alara's words from earlier rang in my ears. "You're always looking for something to be wrong." It felt like a slap, a dismissal of everything I'd been trying to hold on to. I stared up at the sky, my mind racing, searching for answers that wouldn't come. If I'd done everything right, if I'd been the steady one, the provider, the partner, then why did it feel like my family was slipping through my fingers? I stayed outside for a while, the cool air wrapping around me like a blanket. I thought about going back in, sitting down with Alara and trying again, but the thought of more deflection, more excuses, stopped me cold. I couldn't take another round of "you're imagining things," or "it's not what you think." I needed clarity. I needed to understand why the people I'd built my life around were pulling away. But how do you confront a problem when no one else will admit it exists? Eventually, I forced myself back inside. The house was quiet. Leora's door was closed, light spilling out from underneath it. I hesitated in the hallway, wondering if I should knock, but decided against it. Instead, I headed to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and tried to steady my thoughts. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. It was a stark contrast to the life we'd had not so long ago, when the kitchen had been full of laughter, the scent of Alara's cooking filling the air, Leora chatting about her day. Now, it felt more like a museum exhibit, empty, untouched, and hollow. As I sat down at the table, my gaze fell on the stack of mail I hadn't touched yet. Bills, magazines, a postcard from a college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Among them was a letter addressed to Alara. I shouldn't have looked at it. I knew that. But something inside me, curiosity, desperation, made me reach for it. I told myself I wouldn't open it. I just wanted to see who it was from. The name on the envelope wasn't one I recognized, but the return address caught my eye. It wasn't from around here. My stomach twisted. I placed the letter back on the pile and leaned back in my chair, the wheels in my mind spinning. It wasn't just the letter, it was everything. The whispers, the glances, the way Alara always seemed on edge, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I tried to convince myself it could all be explained away. Maybe the letter was nothing. Maybe the distance was just stress. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I knew there was more to the story, and I had to find out what it was. I made a decision then, one I wasn't sure I'd be proud of later. I'd wait. I'd watch. And when the time was right, I'd ask the questions that no one wanted to answer. It wasn't how I wanted things to go. I'd hoped honesty and open communication would be enough. But Alara's reaction earlier had made it clear. She wasn't ready to talk. And Leora, well, she was following her mother's lead. I felt trapped in a house full of secrets, and the only way to get to the truth was to be patient. Painfully patient. In the days that followed, I tried to keep the peace. I kept my distance, not wanting to provoke another argument. I played the role of the quiet observer, watching as Alara and Leora carried on as if nothing was wrong. But the tension was always there, a low hum in the background. Alara would leave the room when I entered. Leora would bury her face in her phone whenever I tried to talk to her. The house was full of people, yet I'd never felt so alone. One evening, while Alara was out running errands, I finally worked up the nerve to talk to Leora again. I knocked on her door and waited. When she opened it, she looked surprised to see me. "Hey, Dad," she said, her voice hesitant. "What's up?" I took a deep breath. "Can we talk?" I asked. "Just for a minute." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. Her room was tidy, as always, but it felt different. The posters on the walls, the books on the shelves, everything seemed more like props in a set than a reflection of who she was. I sat down on the edge of her bed and looked at her. "Leora," I said softly, "I need you to be honest with me. I feel like something's going on, and I need to understand." Her eyes darted away, and she shifted uncomfortably. "Nothing's going on," she said quickly. "I don't know what you mean." I frowned. "Sweetheart, I'm not accusing you of anything. I just feel like we're not as close as we used to be. You've been so distant, and it's hard for me. I want to be here for you, but I can't do that if I don't know what's going on." She looked down at her hands, picking at her fingernails. "It's not you, Dad," she said after a moment. "I'm just dealing with stuff." "What kind of stuff?" I asked gently. She shrugged. "Just school. Friends, you know." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the way she avoided my eyes, the way her answers came too quickly, made me doubt every word. I reached out and put a hand on her knee. "Leora, you can tell me anything," I said. "I'm not going to get mad. I just need to know that you're okay. That we're okay." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with something. I couldn't quite place sadness, maybe, or fear. "I'm fine, Dad," she said softly. "Really, I'm fine." I knew she wasn't. I could feel it in my bones. But I didn't push her. I just nodded and stood up, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "Okay," I said. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here. Anytime." She nodded and watched me leave the room, her expression unreadable. As I closed her door behind me, I felt the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to break through the wall that had been built between us. All I knew was that I couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change. I just didn't know what or when it would happen. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee cup in front of me. The house was quiet, too quiet. Alara and Leora were out, probably shopping again or doing whatever it was. They always seem to do together these days. I should have been grateful for the silence, but all it did was give me too much time to think. The weight of everything pressed down on me like a lead blanket. Every unanswered question, every awkward exchange, every moment I felt shut out, it all played over and over in my mind. I wanted to believe that if I could just find the right words, if I could just make them understand how much I needed them, things would change. But deep down, I knew that wasn't how this was going to play out. Something had shifted between us, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to shift it back. The sound of a car door outside caught my attention. I got up and moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. Sure enough, Alara and Leora were back. They both carried shopping bags, laughing at something I couldn't hear. The sight of them so carefree, so connected, sent a pang of something bitter and painful through my chest. They didn't look like two people weighed down by the same tension that was eating me alive. They looked happy, and I was on the outside looking in. Again. They came through the door, their laughter cutting off abruptly, when they saw me standing there. "Hey," Alara said, her voice neutral. "Did you have a good day?" The question felt forced, like she was going through the motions. I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. "Sure," I replied. "How about you two?" "Just ran some errands," she said, brushing past me, and setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "We picked up a few things for Leora's school project." "A project?" I asked, trying to sound interested. "What kind of project?" Leora shrugged. "Just something for art class," she said, avoiding my gaze. "It's no big deal." I forced a smile. "Well, if you need any help, let me know." "Thanks, Dad," she mumbled before disappearing down the hall. Alara started unpacking the bags, her movements quick and efficient. I leaned against the counter, watching her. "You know," I began, trying to keep my tone light, "I'd like to be more involved with this kind of stuff. The errands, the projects. I feel like I'm missing out." She paused for a fraction of a second before continuing. "You're not missing out," she said without looking at me. "We're just trying to take some of the stress off your plate." "I appreciate that," I said, my voice tight. "But I'm not asking for less. I'm asking to be included." She turned then, meeting my eyes. "Roland, you've been dealing with so much. We just don't want to add to it." "Add to it?" I repeated, my frustration bubbling up. How is including me adding to it? I feel like I'm being shut out of my own family. Her expression hardened. "We're not shutting you out. We're trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I shot back. "I'm not some fragile thing that's going to break if you let me be a part of my daughter's life." "That's not what I mean," she said, her voice rising. "You've been through hell, Roland. I'm just trying to keep things normal for Leora. For us. But it's not normal," I said, the words coming out louder than I intended. This distance, this feeling like I'm on the outside, it's not normal. It's tearing me apart, Alara." She stared at me, her jaw clenched, before finally shaking her head. "I can't do this right now," she said quietly, turning away and heading toward the living room. I stood there, my hands gripping the counter, my chest heaving. I wanted to go after her, to keep talking, to say something that would make her understand, but I didn't know what that was. And I didn't have the strength to keep fighting the same battle over and over. Later that night, I sat in the living room, the TV on but muted, the soft glow of the screen casting shadows across the room. Leora had gone to bed, and Alara was upstairs. I was alone again, left with nothing but my thoughts. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to find the moment where it all went wrong. Was it when I pushed too hard? Or was it when she decided she couldn't do this anymore? Maybe it was both. Or maybe it was neither. Maybe it was something deeper, something I couldn't fix, no matter how much I wanted to. I thought about the life we used to have, the way we used to laugh together, the plans we made for the future. I thought about the times when Alara and I were a team, when we faced everything together. Those moments felt so far away now, like a dream I'd woken up from too soon. I wanted to believe we could get back to that if I just held on long enough, we'd find our way back to each other. But the more I tried to hold on, the more it felt like she was slipping through my fingers. I closed my eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if I'd ever get the answers I needed, or if the distance between us would ever close. But one thing was certain. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. I just didn't know what or how. You've seen how it all unfolded, but was I right to stand my ground? Or should I have walked away sooner? I want to know what you would have done. Comment below and let's talk about it. And don't forget, hit that follow button for more stories that'll keep you guessing until the very last second. Life is unpredictable, and loyalty is fragile. I learned that you can give everything to someone, but when things get hard, they might still walk away. Don't base your self-worth on someone else's commitment. In America, we often define ourselves by our relationships, but true strength comes from within. Focus on building your own stability. Never let anyone make you feel small or powerless. Find your voice, fight for your peace, and take control of your life, because in the end, you're the only one who truly has your back. Stand tall, stay strong, and never give up.